Hello there and welcome to The Great Comeback. I am your host, Holly McClain, and I am coming to you live on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, the #1 talk network out there. I am a life coach and counselor, and I help people come back from big life shifts and upsets. So think big breakups, divorce, career changes, teen struggles. If it's a life transition that you're going through, together you and I will master plan your comeback. So, on today's episode, we have brought back life coach Julie Mast, and we are going to talk about how to let go of emotional wounds. What? Emotional wounds? I hear you asking, what is that? We will get into it. And this is important just to simply have in your awareness, because the more aware we are of the way we treat ourselves, the things we say to ourselves, the thoughts that pop into our head, the more aware we are of those and understanding of a place where they come from, the more compassion that we can have for ourselves, or even dig in if that's some area or a space that we want to begin to heal or work through some stuff there with that. So quick intro. If you have not seen the last show where Julie came on and talked about body love, oh my gosh, you need to see that. It is not a must that you watch before you watch this show because we're talking about something a little bit different. But Julie and I go way, way back, and she supported me through one of my biggest life transitions, which was my divorce. And this is way back when I was in the process of being coach certified and all the things. And so we've got a lot of history here, and Julie is a master at holding space and supporting. So she's got some goodies for us today. And then of course, let me give you her formal introduction in case you haven't heard that yet. Julie is a life coach that uses her intuitive gifts to help heal women's relationship with food and their bodies. She wants every woman to feel total freedom around food so that they can have the energy to focus on living their ultimate life. She lives in Oregon on a Christmas tree and blueberry farm. When she is not busy coaching and writing, she can be found playing in the ocean or in the mountains, or let's be honest, cleaning up after her animals and her kids. Julie, my dear friend, welcome back.
Thank you. It's so good to be here and see your face.
Yay, we're doing this again, but we're diving in this time to healing emotional wounds. So I think we should just start with an even playing field. Share with us, define it. Like, what are emotional wounds?
So emotional wounds are something that's happened to you in your past that you really either sort of like stuffed down and didn't process, or something that was sort of continually happening in your life, in your childhood, that just sort of became this normal. And then, the longer you hold on to them, the more they disrupt your life, and the more that we have to like go inward and really try to clear them. Because, in my work with women that have sort of a disordered relationship with food and their bodies, it manifests oftentimes. They know this stuck feeling is there, but they don't want to face it. It's scary. And so they kind of buffer those emotions with eating or with, alcohol use, different behaviors that sort of avoiding those wounds that we have to really go inward and heal. So
Okay.
Everyone has these. So once you sort of dig into it and figure out, heal something inside you, you're like, you kind of get the roadmap, if you will. So
is it like, I have a broken arm, but I've never really had it set and casted, so it doesn't function properly, and it comes
yes.
out. I try to play a sport or do something like that. It's almost like a broken, like, body part.
Yes. And Michael Singer, who wrote Untethered Soul, one of my all-time favorite books, it's by my bedstand. He describes it in this way, and I think it's a perfect sort of explanation. So if something that somebody does triggers you, let's say you have trust issues and someone breaks your trust, it ends up rubbing that spot that was wounded in the past, right? And so as humans, most of us will actually build structures, not metaphorical structures, and try to keep us safe from ever feeling that feeling. And so it ends up getting heavy and really blocks, divinity, the light from coming through. So that's why you move through life and you're sort of blocked by these emotions that are stuck. And we as humans, like he says, try to build these structures around them so they can't be rubbed. So we avoid certain situations, or we close our hearts because we don't want to get hurt again. And the freedom that you get when you sort of focus on parts of you that are harder to focus on and heal, that we all try to avoid, once those are released and let go, it's just this lightness and freedom that is just amazing.
Well, here's something interesting. I think I've got one for you. I think I had an emotional wound around trusting of strangers. So after, and you know a little bit about this story. So after my divorce, like I had one little scenario where I dated someone that I knew very well, very early on. And that was just like, went up in flames. It was like a 6-week disaster. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know what was happening. And then my husband said, that's called a rebound. I'm like, but I don't rebound. That was kind of disastrous. And once I had spent some time healing and going through things, I was still in a place where I just didn't trust. I turned it like dating a random. Going out there and meeting a random person, like I think it was still just too sensitive for me. So I actually ended up dating 2 different people pretty back to back that I had known from my past.
Yeah. So you had some backstory so that you felt like there was a trust issue just from history. I mean, you had trust from having history.
So I'm wondering if I built up this barrier where I wasn't open to meeting an incredible human that was not from my past, that was a perfect stranger. And so I just kind of narrowed it down, and I felt safe dating 2 different people that were from my past. But that's super limiting. That's almost like creating that barrier, right? Around maybe a wound of being afraid of strangers or men.
And not trusting. I think a lot of the wounds from trust, and tell me if this resonates with you, is it comes down to really not trusting yourself. So that's so much of trust is not trusting yourself. So I know, coming off a divorce or a relationship that, was long and meaningful, and it ends, you kind of question your your own judgment, and you kind of question, why didn't I end it sooner? Why didn't I trust my gut? So I think that a lot of the trust issues coming out of relationships has to do with sort of that self-judgment of, oh my gosh, what decision did I make or didn't make? Or, it's a lot of that critical self-talk, I think, coming out of a relationship.
I agree. I believe that wholeheartedly, 100%. And early on, I wouldn't have said that. I would have said, no, I just don't trust people that I don't know. And then when you back it up, it really has to do with, okay, I'm the one that's discerning whether or not I want to spend an evening with this person or, continue to see that person. You get to the point where it's like, oh, maybe I don't trust my own judgment. Then whose judgment do I trust? Like, what do I do? And it turns into this whole thing, and it kind of turns it upside down. And when I do work with women around divorce too, we have to dive into that, and trust always comes up, because whenever we're projecting something out, like, I don't trust that, or I don't trust that person, it's usually reflecting something back to us.
Yes.
And then we kind of get that message. It's like, oh, everything ends up coming back to me.
That's what's so, like, it's the beauty of it, but it feels unfair sometimes. If you're judging somebody else, or you're trying to, defend from pain, it's so much comes back to ourselves and really what we think about ourselves. And so it's, and our own actions and what we have failed to do or do. So it oftentimes comes back to rest.
It always does. And it's interesting too, because when you talk to people that are on their healing journey from whatever they've gone through, when we're in this space of, well, they did that to me and this happened to me, like we have to step out of that because we're in a very powerless position that way. We're in more of a victim mode, and we have to step out of that and say, okay, what can I own? Or can I at least own that I put up with that for a long time, or that I allowed that into my world, so that we can get a little bit of our power back and own it and shift it. Because if we're just projecting ourselves out into this world as this person who gets victimized or, engages with all the right men, for example, then how do we get out of that spin? Because if we don't bring the power back to ourselves and say, okay, maybe it was some discernment on my end, or maybe it was some judgment.
Yeah.
So let me look at how creatively can I go backtrack and think, okay, moving forward next time, what might be some things that I'm looking for? How do I spot the red flags and spot, the things that are healthy in a relationship? And then it brings the power kind of right back to you, which is good.
It does. And, something that I just kind of remembered that's a little off topic, but we discussed this recently about those sort of God whispers that you get in your gut. You're like, this guy is, he'll take you out to a nice dinner, but do you really want to, I always ask the question when I was single, is it better that I enjoy being by myself? So is this guy going to bring more love and light to my life and energy to my life? And so, getting still and listening to that inner wisdom, which getting back to the emotional blocks, your inner wisdom, when you're blocked up, is really hard to tune into. You have all sorts of different stories going on, and you lack a lot of clarity when you're holding on to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I think it also too, like even if we're trying to think our way out and support ourselves, I think it clogs up our mind as well. You and I had spoke last week, and Julie, did I call you or you called me or whatever happened? And right away you knew. You're like, girl, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I've got some stuff. Like, I'm feeling really sad. I've got like all these things kind of going. And we did this beautiful exercise that you walked me through, which I want you to talk about. But it just really got into clearing up some of that energy, because when you're down in the dumps or feeling blue or just feeling bogged down by all of that stuff, and I think you called it when your chakras are just really murky and icky and there's just all this stuff there, you can't fight your way out of a paper bag. Like I couldn't even think my way to, okay, put your brain together and let's sort through this and figure it out, let alone tap into emotions or my intuition, which is kind of my gut feeling or what feels right to me, because my feelings are just spinning and I'm in discomfort. And so we needed to clear out that junk. And so do you want to share like what you did? Because it was magical. It was so cool.
Yes. I love that meditation. So when you have blocked emotions and they keep chirping at you or whatever, and you decide not to, and it's so, you have to do this in life because we have to function. We've got kids to feed. We've got, work to do. So it's, you sometimes have to like put it aside to process. But if you do that too long, I mean, that's what depression is, right? You're depressing all those emotions. And then when you keep doing that, pretty soon you're choked out and you are, depressed. And so I think, one thing to keep in mind before I explain the meditation, I think it was Ram Dass that said, whatever you're suffering, use it to go to God. And so, I think that's something to always keep in mind. But you were talking about the victim mentality a little bit before.
Yeah.
You have these emotions, something's traumatic has happened to you. Use it as a stair step. And it's so hard, so easy for me to say that, so hard to do when felt like you've been wrong, felt like you've been hurt. But I promise you, there's always a pearl at the end, at the bottom, or the lotus at the end of, at the bottom of all this grief and suffering that will elevate you to a higher place eventually. But there's always a pathway and an invitation to heal and to get stronger in the middle of all of this. So the meditation that we did was basically going into different rooms of emotion. So I had a sense that there was shame and anger going on. And so we went into these rooms and you experienced them and you actually held space for that emotion and let it bubble up and feel it. And then it kind of gets the grip off of you. It releases. And it's this beautiful, I think you felt it energetically, didn't you? You feel this sort of release.
100%. I felt it. All I had to do was simply follow your lead. And so Julie just like guided me into these different rooms, and we would go into the first room, which was grief. And, you know, you had told me to look around and what do you see, you know, and you're putting your imagination to use right now. So if you've never meditated before, it's almost like one of those stories that has, you know, multiple endings. You get to decide. Julie will leave some blanks and you decide, okay, what am I seeing? And you might not be seeing anything, and that's okay. And as a master meditator, you might be seeing all kinds of things, but you just kind of go with the flow of what feels right. And you just allow yourself to, like they say, process an emotion. And there's a definition for that. And there are ways to do that. And that's what us as coaches do with people. We help them process emotions. This is a way to do it. But you took me, and here's what was fascinating. You took me into the grief room, like what do you have to, you know, what is grief? Grief is really heavy, and it's got a lot of old stuff too. So when you talk about the old wounds, the emotional wounds, and I want you to dive into this after, you know, those can be wounds that have come from your childhood.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know, I went, and knowing, you know, where grief comes from, I'm like, okay, I'm dredging up all the things.
I'm gonna bring it all into the room. We're gonna hash this out right here.
The whole thing. And I was like, even if it's little, like this is when you create the snowball. You know, sometimes they say like, don't let it snowball and turn into an avalanche. This is where you would do that. I mean, I pulled up stuff like, and I was never a mom and I never had kids and like all this stuff was coming for grief. And it was very, almost like to me, it felt like a very pathetic, sad, like letting go of. And I mean, it was waterworks. It was just waterworks.
Yeah. And that's the best way to process your emotion actually is through tears. So I always tell people, if you're silent, I'm not going to talk. You have to cry it, because this is your space to do it. Because you can't walk around crying all day. But if you can tap into it, those tears are like the best.
Oh my gosh. And then Julie, what did you say about tears and how many tears you cry based upon healing?
Yes. You know, I think Martha Beck, I think I learned this in our training.
Okay.
And it was, I love the saying around it, and I quite honestly can't remember it, but it's basically the best way to process and release emotion is through tears. The quickest way to heal and process them is through tears. And there's a lovely saying about it that I can't remember, but it's so true. It's just this easy, I think it's because it's a physical purging, you know, and so you're getting the physical along with emotional. I don't know, but I know that's true for myself.
No, it was so effective. And then I'm going to speed it up because we have a commercial coming up, but then you moved me into the anger room. And for me, for some reason, that felt a little empowering to just be ticked off and upset. What's in there that's angry? And I share this with clients all the time, and especially my work with teens. I tell them, there isn't an emotion that's bad or wrong. Anger serves a beautiful purpose. It helps you set boundaries. It protects you. There's nothing wrong with anger. We process the anger, and then you took me into the joy room, and that was just simply joyful to think about the joy that's in my life right now. And when we wrapped up that meditation, I felt cleared out. It wasn't as if like all of my issues are solved. I still had some things I needed to think about.
Oh, yeah.
But that stuck feeling, that was literally you supporting me in moving energy. And this is beautiful stuff.
Yeah, it's so necessary. Except if when you're clogged, you don't let, you know, the light come through, divinity come through. So it's very, very effective.
Yes. So we have to run to a commercial, just a couple quick minutes. We'll be back with Julie, and we're going to talk about emotional wounds relating to childhood, some of the older, deeper stuff, and like what that is and what that looks like. So we'll see you in a bit. Okay, Julie. So we left off talking about emotional wounds, what they look like, how to clear them. So let's dive into emotional wounds that can be connected to childhood, like old stuff. Like, what is that? Like, what does that look like? What do you see?
Oh, it's, I believe that we all like are born into our families that we're supposed to. So like part of it is, our parents weren't perfect. Life was not perfect for us because we have to grow, right? We have to experience these things and get stronger and grow from them. So childhood is painful no matter what situation you're, raised in. So there's things that we all hold different stories to, like rejection, abandonment, trust, fear of failure if your parents were really critical, or maybe if you performed, you got so much attention, like in sports or if you're an actor or something, and feeling like you need to do something to get praise. I mean, it's just little things like this that as you get older, when you still hold on to them, it can cause some disturbance.
And I'm imagining, and I've heard this before as a theory, that oftentimes when you get into like a big long-term relationship or a marriage, and you begin to settle into that other person, your heart opens up, but also some of that old or wounded stuff tends to percolate as well. And then you're kind of left sorting through some of that among the other layers of, two people coming together who are, very different and come from different family upbringings, etc. So my whole point in saying that is, these older wounds can be things, I think, sometimes that we don't even know are there until we're in a situation that comes up, or we have someone that we're working for, or a new boss that comes in and they have a certain way of doing, and all of a sudden it triggers and stirs, and it's so difficult and challenging. How do we know if it's an old wound or if it's just something that's getting under your skin that's like a new thing?
Oh gosh.
I mean,
that's hard. I think that our minds sort of want to repeat what's comfortable. So oftentimes if you were even abused or witnessed abuse in the house, I believe this to be true, that a lot of times you end up in relationships that might be abusive, so I think that kind of it's human nature to sort of repeat something for comfort. It's familiar, even though it's unhealthy familiar. So you kind of got that playing into it. And then I definitely think that in relationships at work or in your romantic relationships, the stuff that needs to be healed from your childhood will come up no matter what. So sometimes you end up marrying somebody. If you had a hypercritical mother, you might have a hypercritical spouse. So that's just sort of, I think, God's invitation to continue to heal what you need to work on. So I think that's like a way that it's, again, just trying to get those parts to heal and to open up. And so in those situations, it's sort of like this flashlight, like, oh, you thought you could trust somebody, but look, there's something there, it brings it all up. So,
yeah. And I think that's a good indication when those lessons keep circling back around, which is a theory that we are continually confronted with situations or people that will bring things up for us. And if we start to see patterns, if we haven't learned the lesson this way, then someone else is going to pop in and we're going to learn the lesson one way or the other. And I see this happening a lot with clients who are just getting out and dating, and they're starting to see repeat patterns because we can actually isolate. We can say, okay, this is when it comes to relationship or when it comes to engagement with men or women or whomever you're dating, this thing keeps coming up. That's a lesson. There's something there that's worth digging into. Sometimes it might not mean that it's an emotional wound from the past, but it could be tied to something much deeper, which is what's cool about coaching is, it's about digging a little bit deeper and getting down to
layers, taking the layers off, like we have all these layers around us. So taking it down to its core and getting clear about what's going on for sure.
Absolutely. And that's when I think, when things start popping up or you're like, I just can't seem to get around this particular issue that keeps coming up. It's like, what is my role in inviting that in? Or do I need to resolve it? Is it something I just keep pushing down and pushing away? And I've met a lot of people, and we all do this, where we have these little things or big things that we're like, I know that needs to be addressed, but I really don't want to dive into it. It's not going to disappear.
No. And, I think that comes into surrender. So if you are done with something that keeps coming up, you'll finally heal it, right? I mean, it's like, that's what I see a lot with I feel like women transform so much faster when they're really ready to give up their relationship, their disordered relationship with food. Because we can talk all around it, but when someone's really ready, and that's how I was with my own, eating journey. And you and I just recently talked about, we all have these hills to climb. Mine is caring what other people think. I think I'm finally I'm done thinking about this. I've done work around it, and I continue, it's obviously stuff is going to come up. That's a hard one to gain total freedom around, but I'm just kind of tired of it. And so it keeps coming up, and it's like, oh my gosh, I need to release this. I need to heal from this. And that's so much of the journey of healing, is really being fed up with your old patterns, being fed up with kind of being in a cage, living a life that is not 100% fulfilling, and where you're not 100% yourself. So shedding those beliefs that are keeping us sort of playing small.
Yeah. And Julie, that's a big one. And I think that that's a big one for a lot of us too, because we live in a world where there are multiple constructs and multiple contexts to who we are, whether it's you're the mom, when you are picking up your littles, and how you are within the context of those people and who is viewing you and seeing you there. And then there's your other role as, wife or friend or member of your family of origin.
And your inner self. I mean, you've got, we all have these different, different, I don't want to say personalities. I can't think of the word, but
like roles.
Different roles. Yeah. And acting sort of a little bit different with all those different people. Like, obviously I talk to my children differently than I would you or Rick. So.
And one of the big things that when we first started our coaching program, they talked about the social self, and the true self. So the social self is like, who are you out there in the world? And then when you can really be who you truly are, who is your true self? And you know what? It's hard to sort through that. Who is your true self? At times you might think you're tapped into it, and other times you're like, well, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but I play different roles. And so getting down to that is super helpful, and looking at the stories behind what you tell yourself about who you really are within the context of what's out there. You might end up finding a little nugget and a little wound, an emotional wound that's there in your story. So we want to really listen and tune into the stories too, right?
Yes. And I think the stories, we tell ourselves, like, we have to be perfect parents. We have to be an available spouse. We have, and that perfectionism just can absolutely exhaust you after a while, and also even the painful stories, like the stories like we weren't loved as children, or, people didn't listen to me. I wasn't allowed to be sad when I was younger. All these stories, first of all, in the spirit of Byron Katie, asking yourself, is it really, really true? And trying to find other ways to look at it that, it might have felt true, but maybe think of 3 different ways that's not true, and look at it through a different lens. That definitely shines some light on those wounds for sure. Asking yourself, is this true? Get still. Is this really, really true?
I love that as a tool for listeners that they can do on their own, because I've fallen into this pity party, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's this. And then to pull yourself out of that space,
kind of step back.
You question it. Is it true? Is it 100% true without a doubt? And 99% of the time, no. There are always exceptions to what's true.
Yeah. And there's different angles of the truth. So, you know, obviously, if someone hurt you, it hurts. It's true. That's the truth. It hurt, and they said something, but to look beyond that and look about, you know, were you impeccable with your word with them every time, and kind of do some self-reflection. You know, this person is mean. Is it true? Is it really true? How have I not, you know, been 100% truthful with them, or, you know,
yeah, because a lot of the times those stories are not serving us.
No, they're keeping us down, and they also sort of just keep spinning those wounds too. It's like it's feeding that sort of festering. I think of it as like soul pain, right? So you have these painful stories that just keep piling in, and it just keeps it all stuck. So, yeah, for the listeners out there, anyone who's not familiar with Byron Katie's work, thework.com. It is an amazing tool.
Yeah, it's a really cool tool, and it helps you look at a situation. And now, I caution, if we're talking about something really deep and intense, you want to do this evaluation with someone, with a professional therapist.
Okay. That's actually a very good caveat there.
Yeah, and if it's something like, if it's something more along the lines of like, my brother never really liked me when we were growing up, which is not true. My brother's a lovely man. I love my brother's one of my favorite people on the planet. But, you know, if it's something like that, really, is that 100% true? And you can, essentially what you're doing is you're flipping it and you're creating some evidence for yourself that the opposite could be true. Maybe he did like me. He kicked me out of his room. However, he did engage and we did have these moments together and blah, blah, blah. And it just softens it up, because sometimes those stories are just painful to hold on to and we don't need to. Then there's a difference between something that is a traumatic situation, a traumatic incident. Yeah. Then we want to wind in, you know, a professional to support us with healing trauma, which is a totally different ballgame.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you have some strong, you know, some experienced major trauma, the work is not something you just want to jump into by yourself, for sure.
Yeah. Gosh. Julie, thank you for being here again and sharing with us all about these emotional wounds. It sounds pretty serious, and it can be, but there's also a lighter side to
we all have them. We all have them. And I just would invite everyone to question them and think about them and really feel them and not avoid them, because that's what keeps you heavy and keeps you sort of stuck. If you're feeling stuck and depressed, it's focusing on this. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Julie, what's the best way for listeners to get in touch with you, and where can they find you?
At juliegmast.com. And email or just book. I like to do like a free call, make sure that, you know, it's a good fit, and also just to see where we're at and check in. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie, for being on The Great Comeback. And thank you to our listeners for joining us in the conversation today. If you would like one-on-one coaching support as you navigate your personal comeback, reach out to me. You can visit me at hollymcclaincoaching.com. And a final thank you to Cece, my amazing producer who works her magic on the back end to make this show possible. Join me again next time. Have a great rest of your week and be well.